once there was a postman who fell in love with a raven. The postman lived on the edge of a flat, desolate suburb. When he looked to the west, he could see the skyscrapers of the city of which his suburb was the outermost appendage. When he looked east, he saw flat, bare land that stretched away from his home until it met the cliffs that stood over even starker, more desolate places. His house was very small. There were no trees around it and no birds. Once in a while, a rabbit came by and ate all the strawberries in his little garden. The postman had been a postman for quite a few years. He was no longer a young and ardent postman. He thought he had seen just about everything Her Majesty's Postal Service could offer in the way of danger and difficulty, hilarity and boredom. He yearned to have an adventure, but he suspected that he probably wouldn't. Every day he sorted his mail and put it in his sack and walked his round. Then he went home, had his tea, watched TV, and fell asleep on the sofa. He sometimes had nightmares that featured email. On a particularly rainy Monday morning in April, the postman was sorting mail when he found a letter with an address he had never seen before. The letter was stamped "Special Delivery." It was addressed in an elegant hand that suggested it might have been mailed in a previous century. Dripping Rock, Raven's Nest, 2 Flat Drab Manor, East Underwhelm, Otherworld, EE1 LH9. The postcode made no sense. The letter had gone astray. He brought it to his supervisor, a venerable lady who had been with the Postal Service since before the invention of penny post. She examined the address closely, raising and lowering her spectacles several times to inspect it. She handed it back to the postman. "East of East, Lower Heights," she told him. "It is, I'm afraid, on your walk." "How odd," replied the postman. "I never had a letter to deliver there before." He felt, as one does, when dreaming about familiar houses with sudden strange rooms discovered in unlikely places. It was as though he had found a train station attached to his kitchen. "They don't receive much mail," his supervisor admitted. The return address merely said, "Pin Feathers, West Farther," which didn't illuminate the situation. "Well," said the postman. He finished sorting his mail and put it in his sack. He walked his round. The weather got a bit brighter. The postman thought, it's not a bad day for a long walk. He felt a slight thrill at the prospect of a new address. The postman goes on to actually deliver this letter, and in the process he finds a young raven who's fallen out of the nest. And he thinks she's broken, so he takes her home. And she's not actually broken, but she doesn't exactly mind being picked up and taken away. And they fall in love, and they have an egg. And when the egg hatches, it's a perfect little girl. And when she grows up, it becomes obvious that she's not exactly human because she can't speak. And as she gets older and older, she yearns to be a raven. She's convinced that she's a raven. And when she goes off to university, she meets a plastic surgeon who's willing to help her have that happen. So that's the transformation part.
This is a very compressed version of part of the opening of my novel, The Interesting, so it's sort of like the bouillon cube version. On a warm night in early July of that long evaporated year, the Interestings gathered for the very first time. They were only 15, 16, and they began to call themselves the name with tentative irony. Julie Jacobson, an outsider and possibly even a freak, had been invited in for obscure reasons, and now she sat in a corner on the unswept floor and attempted to position herself so she would appear unobtrusive yet not pathetic, which was a difficult balance. If she called attention to herself in any way now, someone might start to wonder why she was here, and really she knew she had no reason to be here at all. It had been miraculous when Ash Wolf had nodded to her earlier in the night at the row of sinks and asked if she wanted to come join her and some of the others later. Some of the others, even that wording was thrilling. Sure, she'd said out of instinct. What if she'd said no, she liked to wonder afterward, in a kind of strangely pleasurable Baroque horror? What if she'd turned down the lightly flung invitation and went about her life, thudding obliviously along like a drunk person, a blind person, a moron, someone who thinks that the small packet of happiness she carries is enough? Yet having said sure at the sink in the girls' bathroom, here she was now planted in the corner of this unfamiliar, ironic world. Irony was new to her and tasted oddly good, like a previously unavailable summer fruit. Soon she and the rest of them would be ironic much of the time, unable to answer an innocent question without giving their words a snide little adjustment. Fairly soon after that, the snideness would soften, the irony would be mixed in with seriousness, and the years would shorten and fly. Then it wouldn't be long before they all found themselves shocked and sad to be fully grown into their thicker, finalized adult selves with almost no chance for reinvention. That night, though, long before the shock and the sadness and the permanence, as they sat in Boys TP3, their clothes bakery sweet from the very last washer-dryer loads at home, Ash Wolf said, "Every summer at camp we sit here like this. We should call ourselves something." "Why?" said Goodman, her brother, "so the world can know just how unbelievably interesting we are?" "We could be called the unbelievably interesting ones," said Ethan Figman. "How's that?" "The interesting," said Ash. "That works." The name was ironic and the improvisational christening was jokily pretentious, but still, Julie Jacobson thought, they were interesting. These teenagers around her, all of them from New York City, were like royalty and French movie stars with a touch of something papal. Briefly, in that summer of 1974, when she or any of them looked up from the deep, stuporous concentration of their one-act plays and dance sequences and acoustic guitars, they found themselves staring into a horrible doorway, and so they quickly looked away. Two boys at camp had copies of All the President's Men on the shelves above their beds. The book had come out not long before camp began, and at night when the teepee talk wound down into sleep or rhythmic, crickety masturbation, they would read by flashlight. Can you believe those fuckers, they thought? This was the world they were meant to enter, a world of fuckers. They paused before the doorway to that world, and what were they supposed to do, just walk through it? Later in the summer, Nixon would lurch away, leaving his damp slug trail, and the entire camp would watch on an old Panasonic that had been trundled into the dining hall by the owners, Manny and Edie Wunderlich, two aging socialists who were legendary in the small, diminishing world of aging socialists. Now they were gathering because the world was unbearable, and they were not.
I'm chewing gum, you know, my mother used to say, chew gum and swallow it behind will close up. Good Lord Bird is about 108, he's about 100, it's written by an 111-year-old black man who's telling this whopper to a fellow deacon at the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Wilmington, Delaware. This is this 111-year-old black man telling his life, what he poses as a girl having been kidnapped by the late great abolitionist John Brown out of Pottstown, Kansas. The book begins in Kansas. I was born a colored man, don't you forget it, but I lived as a colored woman for 17 years. My pa was a full-blooded Negro out of Pottstown, Kansas Territory, north of Fort Scott near Lawrence. Pa was a barber by trade, but that never gives him full satisfaction. Preaching the gospel was his main line. Pa didn't have a regular church like the type that don't allow nothing but bingo on Wednesday nights and women sitting around making paper doll cutouts. He saved souls one at a time, cutting hair at Dutch Henry's Tavern, which was tucked at a crossing on the California Trail that runs along the Kaw River in South Kansas Territory. Pa ministered most of the lowlifes, four-flushers, slaveholders, and drunks who came along the Kansas Trail. Now, that's true, there was a movement in town to hang my pa on account of his getting filled up with the Holy Ghost and joy juice and throwing himself at the flood of Westwood pioneers who stopped in to lay supplies at Dutch Henry's. Speculators, trappers, children, merchants, Mormons, even white women. Then poor settlers had enough to worry about, what with rattlers popping up from the floorboards and breech loaders that fired for nothing and building chimneys the wrong way that choked them to death, without having to fret about a Negro flinging himself at them in the name of our great Redeemer who wore the crown. In fact, by the time I was 10 years old in 1856, there was open talk in town of blowing Pa's brains out. They would have done that, I think, had not a visitor come that spring and got the job done for him. Dutch Henry sat right near the Missouri border. It served as a kind of post office, courthouse, rumor mill, and gin house for Missouri rebels who came across the Kansas line to drink, throw cards, tell lies, frequent wars, and holler to the moon about niggas taking over the world and the white man's constitutional rights being thrown in the outhouse by the Yankees and so forth. I paid no attention to that talk. But my aim in the days was to shine shoes on my pa cut hair and shove as much Johnny cake and ale down my little red lane as possible. But come spring, talking Dutch circled around a certain murderous white scoundrel named Old John Brown. a Yank from back east who come into Kansas territory to stir up trouble with his gang of sons called the Potawatomi Rifles. To hear them tell that old John Brown and his murderous sons planned to deaden every man, woman, and child on the prairie. Old John Brown stole horses. Old John Brown burned homesteads. Old John Brown raped women and hacked off heads. Old John Brown done this, and old John Brown done that. And why, by God, by the time they was done with him, old John Brown sounded like the most onerous, murderous, low-down son of a bitch you ever saw. And I resolved if I was ever to run across him, why, by God, I would do him myself. Just on account of what he'd done, was gonna do to the good white people I know. Well, not long after I decided on the proclamation, an old tottering Irishman teetered into Dutch Indians and sat in Pod's barber's chair. Weren't nothing special about him. There was 100 respecting prairie bums wandering around Kansas territory in the days looking for a lift west or a job rustling cattle. This drummer weren't nothing special. He was a stooped, skinny fellow, fresh off the prairie, smelling like buffalo dung, with a nervous twitch in his jaw and a chin full of ragged whiskers. After a few minutes, the Irishman glanced around, took a seat at Pop's chair, and seeing that nobody was standing too close, said to Pop quietly, "You a Bible man?" Well, my pa was a lunatic when it came to God, and that perked him right up and said, "Why, boss, I surely is. I know all kinds of Bible verses." The old coot smiled. I can't say it was a real smile, for his face was so stern and weren't capable of smiling. But his lips kind of widened out. The mention of the Lord clearly pleased him, and it should have, for he was running on the Lord's grace right then and there. For that was the murder of old John Brown himself, the scourge of Kansas territory, set right there in Dutch's Tavern with a $1,500 reward on his head and half the population in Kansas territory aiming to put a charge on him.